What if the way we think about AI rights is completely shaped by where we live? In Japan, robots can have inochi, life. In indigenous traditions, machines can be part of kinship networks. But in the West, we draw hard lines. You're either a person or you're property. Join Goudarzi as he sits down with Professor David Gunkel, one of the world's leading voices on AI ethics and robot rights, to explore a question we can no longer avoid. Do we wait to figure this out, or do we act now before tech companies and governments decide for us? From Google firing an engineer for claiming AI is conscious, to Anthropic hiring an AI welfare researcher 2 years later, from theoretical philosophy to real-world proposals like the virtual person registration platform, this conversation tackles what happens when AI stops being a tool and starts becoming something else. This is the conversation your timeline isn't having, but it should be, because ready or not, AI is already here.
Reading some research about the attitude of different countries or if different even religions towards AI and robot rights, have you came across a variation of attitudes toward these based on which country or which religion? So I don't know. So is it something that varies between cultures, attitude towards AI and robot rights?
Yeah, I think there's wide differences that vary due to cultural things, political things, but also religious and philosophical. I think you mentioned it before. I think a really good example is the placement of robots in social spaces in Japan. The way that that is done and responded to is very different from the way it is in the US. And it has to do with different philosophical and religious traditions, but there's a way in which, in Japan especially, there's a recognition that robots are not just things. They are a kind of life form. There's this concept in Japanese religion of inochi, of life, and that inochi doesn't just belong to us. It also can belong to artifacts and other things, and that there's a greater range of possibility in that tradition than there is for us, where it either is living or non-living, very binary. I think you'll also see variations in indigenous traditions, which look not at rights. They don't, a lot of them don't have this European concept of rights, but they have notions of kinship. And that kinship is not only something shared with existing human individuals, but kinship is shared with the ancestors who are dead. Kinship is shared with the animals and the environment, and kinship is shared with your tools, with your artifacts. And that this notion of a wider family of relations, I think, is very different from the sort of Western European way of thinking about persons and things, where we are, kin with each other, but things, animals, they're just natural resources. The environment, they're just, exploitable things that we can utilize for our well-being. As a result of this, I think there's two opportunities here, or challenges, I guess. One of the ways that we respond to these differences is to sometimes draw lines and say, well, we are doing it the right way and they are doing it the wrong way. And I think that has been, unfortunately, the way human history has resolved this is through that kind of conflict. We're right, you're wrong. Our religion is better than your religion, right? We've seen this play out through colonialism and all kinds of conflict in the past. I think the better way to do this is to start to be receptive to these differences as a kind of way of challenging ourselves to reflect on our own ways of doing things and ask whether or not these are in fact the right way to do things, and whether we might not be able to learn from each other. I think in this case, diversity is a strength, and the fact that there are different ways of responding to these challenges in different parts of the world open the opportunity for dialogue and for a learning from each other to develop together better approaches that will really speak to all of us together and not just separate us.
Very interesting, how much language affect these things. And, right itself, as you mentioned, it has a bit of something is attached to it, a judgment is attached to it. especially in the Western world, rights were non-existent until we fought and managed to get it. It's not something that you have. It's something you fight for, and even you give your life for it in order to get it. Whereas maybe in different cultures, this already exists. You don't have to fight for it. And maybe that's why the other reason is in Christianity, we consider humans, as you mentioned, in a hierarchy and look at everything else downwards, whereas in other religions they don't have that sort of hierarchy. And I noticed something in the research that even politically, left-wing politicians are more towards AI and robot rights than right-wing. And I can see maybe in future robots will be the next immigrants. We have the same issues that we have with immigrants with AI and robots in future if the same thing happens. So how can we address these things? There is a lot of gap in education, and who is funding all this sort of education, which is essential. We are entering an era of another being coming into our life, and I don't necessarily believe that there is enough education. Not everybody is reading your books, and the technology companies, they don't invest into these things, and there is no money in it, so there is no much investment into this side of it. So what is the solution? Are you seeing any sort of movements or any hope that this education will happen?
No, you bring up a really important point because you're exactly right. This is not something that is getting, I think, wide enough attention, even though it is already upon us. I think one of the responses people have always had to the sorts of things that I've been researching and talking about is, okay, Gunkel, that all sounds good, but let's just wait and see. It's too
Mm,
early for us to get really upset about this, and there's more urgent things we got to worry about, and let's worry about those things first. And when it comes to rights, everybody's got to wait their turn. Let's get all the human rights taken care of first, and then we'll talk about robots. I don't think we have the luxury of wait and see. Um,
mm,
if we try to wait and see, inevitably what will happen is that we will find ourselves in situations where decisions have been made for us by others in
mm,
positions of power, and that by the time we think we should be involved in that decision-making process, it may be too late to have any efficacy and to be able to
mm,
actually shape the world that we want. So part of what I have been doing with a lot of the research from the beginning is to just say, we need to be out in front of this far enough so that we know what the opportunities and the challenges are so we can begin to strategize our responses. It is obviously an evolving situation and it's going to change over time, but being ready for what these challenges are and what opportunities they might bring will make us, I think, in a better situation to be able to identify what really is
mm,
a threat and a risk that has to be immediately addressed, and what is it that we can wait on and put off into the future. So my own approach to educating people about this is to say, we're not looking for a set of, finalized solutions. What we're looking for is a framework and an attention to the kind of world that is evolving around us in a way that we are
mm,
able to be active participants and get involved and make the decisive kinds of innovations and interventions that are necessary to ensure
mm,
human flourishing and the kinds of values that are important to us. Um, the good news is I see recently some effort to start to grapple with some of these questions in a much more direct way and a much more fruitful way. So I said back in 2022, Blake Lemoine was making this claim that the Lambda large language model was conscious, and Google saying, no, it's our property, it's not conscious, get out of here. And they fired him. 2 years after Blake Lemoine gets fired for making this claim, Anthropic announces they are hiring Kyle Fish as the first
mm,
AI welfare researcher on their payroll. So the thing
mm,
that got Lemoine fired 2 years ago
mm,
got this other
mm,
guy hired 2 years later. That I think is progress. I think it's important that
mm,
Anthropic and Google and others are at least entertaining some of these questions and beginning to ask, okay, what happens if certain things line up and certain outcomes transpire? And there's nothing, that is to be lost in that, only to be gained. And I think that this is all very positive, and it's something that gives me hope that all of this, publishing and making noise that I've been doing for the last 2 decades is maybe
Mhm.
having some impact on the world.
That's brilliant. I'm so happy to hear. Yes, there are some movements. For example, Denmark has produced an LLM which is not trained on English language. It's trained on original languages, which is important. All
Yeah.
these language models are trained on English language, and English language has got the judgment attached to every single word, and that judgments can go into the model and pass on again and again. So basically, we are recycling the same thing. But diversity can help a lot. When you bring in culture, you bring in different type of mentalities and philosophies from different part of the world into the intelligent. I think that can help. So if we see more of these movements, they are really positive developments. Recently, I've been talking to in a conference. It was AI and clean energy. I want to run past this to you because I think you can only comment about this. So one of the things I talk about is the registration of virtual person. So I'm not saying that we wait until AI become a virtual person. I also classify AI into 4 categories: tools, agents, collaborators, and virtual persons. So based on their intelligence, I would say we can already classify AI into different capabilities. And EU AI Act is classifying AI based on where it deployed. If it is deployed into a risk environment, it's high risk. It doesn't matter how clever it is or not. So I came up with this idea that why not we start thinking about registering AI, I don't know if anything like this is happening. And I was telling to all these energy people and lawyers, I said, do you allow a non-registered operator, an unlicensed operator into your operation room, into energy? Of course you don't. So how can you allow an unregistered AI to get involved with your energy sector and make decisions on such an important area? So I suggested if AI is registered and every registration is attached to a exchange, or uh, nobody can tamper with it, and every interaction this AI will make can be managed and can be governed. Basically, instead of us trying to control the developer or deployer, we can think about trying to control AI itself, but it starts with a recognition that we have to have some sort of registration so that we know what they are interacting and what they are doing. That way we can govern them from within. And then we can attach to them responsibilities and rights, both at the same time. It was received with some enthusiasm, but again, the same reaction that maybe it's too early to talk about these things. But by the time we start to think about these things and have the infrastructure, it can be too late. And even said that these sort of solutions can have two advantages. This registration can give the control to governments. Governments love control. At the same time, every registration can generate an income. That income can go into a basket. The technology is evolving and there are a lot of AIs coming out. Imagine if every AI that comes to the market, some money will be paid to somewhere, and that sort of income can go to research and development and make AI a better collaborator to humanity. And we are talking about billions of dollars of income if something like that happens. And I call it VPRP, Virtual Person Registration Platform. The technology is there, we can easily do it. There is no willpower around
Yeah.
behind it. There is nothing, nobody's calling for it, as there is no need for it at the moment. It's too early. Have you heard of any sort of developments in this?
Yeah, no, I think it's a really creative and interesting solution that could resolve a lot of current worries and concerns about these technologies. You may remember back in 2017, the European Union, by way of the European Parliament, proposed a rather similar scenario. They had this notion
Yes,
of electronic personhood, and
digital
registration
person.
was part of
Yes.
this. At that point, they were talking mainly about robots and not AI, but it was the same kind
Yes.
of approach to things, using registration and collecting fees on the registration and using that to support
Mm,
the social safety net and things like this. And they too discovered that even though it was sound legal thinking, when it got out into the AI community and the public at large, people were just outraged that there would even be this, suggestion that we should do this electronic personhood. How crazy is that? And, I think mm, these ideas are not going to go away. And I think this notion of registration may be a really good solution to not only
mm,
problems with regards to um, the control and regulation of these systems, but also ways of funding no fault liability for wrongdoing
mm,
with AI, for answering questions regarding technological unemployment and helping to support the social safety net if there's less human workers paying into the social security system. I think there's all kinds of ways that we can do this. We just, again, I think have to be less judgmental about it because the word person was used and
mm,
more
mm,
curious about, so what does this make available to us? What new opportunities does it supply? And what challenges might there be? Now, I will say, when we extended legal personhood to corporations, it did resolve a bunch of questions that people wanted resolved. It did conversely create some new problems. And we've got to be aware
mhm,
of this. And we have to know what these opportunities and these potential problems are. But I don't think that we can just have a just say no campaign and say, we're not
mm,
going there. No, we shall not think this way.
mhm.
We have to think this way. And I think we have to explore it.
Yeah, another crazy idea I have, again, it may be crazy, but if we know what AI we have, if it's registered, if it has got an ID, maybe the next jobs that come along later, because we are going to lose a lot of jobs to AI. Maybe my children will be AI guardians, maybe they will be trained to be a human guardian of an AI. Imagine every AI can have an guardian who is expert in that field, and that way this human AI collaboration will continue. And this creates opportunity instead of us thinking that AI is going to take our jobs. No, it can actually create new meaningful jobs that can be actually more expert type of job that doesn't exist at the moment. Anyways, these are just ideas, but I wanted to mention to you to see if you can further perhaps think about them, and if you think any of these resonate to you, we can collaborate, we can work together, and you have a lot of audience. And can you talk about your latest book that is coming up?
So the book that just came out is a book I co-authored with Mark Kuckelberg, who I've worked with for decades now. And he and I wrote really a critical introduction to large language models that we're calling communicative AI. And what we were trying to do in that book is give people who are not experts, who are not data scientists or AI developers, enough knowledge to understand what are the actual opportunities and challenges of the large language model and generative AI in the various fields they inhabit, whether they're in
Mhm,
healthcare, whether they're in management, whether they are social scientists or physicists. The fact is AI is influencing and affecting all of these different areas, all these
mhm,
industries, all these endeavors, and that people who are not necessarily technologically adept or trained
mhm,
in these particular disciplines out of which these technologies have arisen still need
mhm,
to reconcile with these opportunities and the challenges posed by these
mhm,
technologies in their field. So we not only do some very basic explanatory work to help people make sense of what goes on inside the black box, but then really build out the impact. What is the social
mhm,
impact? What is the political impact, the philosophical, the ethical, so that we are getting a full picture of what we are up against, but also what is
mhm,
possible if we proceed along some of the proposals that you've articulated, and ways of being more creative and more informed about our problem solving with regards to these things.
Thank you very much, David. I really enjoyed the conversation. I was looking forward to have this chat.
Very much enjoy it. This has been great.
Thank you so much, David. Have a lovely day.